Three eminent historians from the South Puget Sound and archaeologists, anthropologists. We have Dr. Dale Croes, anthropologist with the South Puget Sound Community College, who will be speaking. We have Roger Easton, who's a local historian and member of the Thurston County Heritage Commission, and then my colleague and friend, they're all my friends, but my colleague, Shanna Stevenson with the Washington State Historical Society Outreach Services Division. Shanna will be coordinating this year's Pacific Northwest History Conference in October of 2012 at the Washington State History Museum in Tacoma. So thank you all for coming today. They're going to be talking, of course, about the George and Isabella Bush family, new research into their history, especially their genealogy, and some archaeological discoveries from recent times. So thank you all very much for coming, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Susan. Today we're going to talk about one of the earliest pioneers in the area, and you already know it's George Bush, who came to this area in 1845. Let me, though, tell you who we are so you know why we're here. I'm Roger Easton, and I represent today the State Archives, the State Library, and the Digital Archives. And it's my purpose to kind of tell you what you can expect to find if you are looking for family history. And so we used the Bush family to do that. Also, we have Shanna Stevenson, who has written many historic publications on local and state history. She's currently the coordinator of the Washington Women's History Consortium through the State Historic Society. She was instrumental in the establishment of the Bush family marker that you might have seen on Old 99, not far from the Bush house. And Dr. Dale Croes, as you've already been told, is the professor of anthropology at South Puget Sound Community College, and he is also an adjunct faculty member with the Washington State University. And he's worked with the Bush property through various owners to do some archaeology to fill in some of the blanks. Whoops. Now, there are many other sources that you can use for family history, but primarily I'm going to talk about the ones you see on the screen. Before you leave, you might pick up a copy of this paper, which gives you contact information. Washington State has 5 regional archives. One is in Olympia, that's the Southwest Regional Archives. Then there's the Puget Sound Archives system, and also the Northwest and Eastern, and all of those are represented on this sheet, so you can contact them for anything you'd like to find. Okay, the archives and the Southwest Regional Archives would have this kind of documentation and records. And all of these are helpful. You would be surprised what you can find in something that might sound very mundane. So we're going to look at a few of these as they were affected by the Bush family. The State Archives and Southwest Regional Archives have over 1 million boxes. And you can arrange for a tour if you'd like to go look at that. I guess if you've seen one box, you've seen them all, but when you see them all together, it's quite a sight. Then the books called leathers are the original handwritten documents that are from all over the state. I should tell you, the State Archives itself does governmental things that affect the whole state. That would be records of the governor and the legislature and all of this sort of thing. The Southwest or other regional branches would have local jurisdictions. It would be counties, cities, even school districts, anything that's within the counties. Southwest Regional has 9 counties that comprise it, and it's in the same building as the State Archives building. Now we're talking about this family. Actually, the major person was already gone when this was taken. He died very early, but this is the extension of his family. We start with land records, grantor and grantee records. The one at the top, you might notice, starts in 1854. So every Thurston County, I'll mention now, deed ever written is there up to current day. And so this will give you the location and the volume number, and you can go to that volume and see the actual deed. Now this is one of those that I found where George Bush actually bought 4 lots in downtown Olympia, which we're trying to locate right now where they are. It states right on there which block and so on and so forth. So I think that we can do that without too much trouble. Primarily, though, he's known to live in this area, but it was bigger than the yellow part. But he did a lot of selling of land, or his descendants did, and it got down to a very small area. This is something that wouldn't go back that far, but if you're looking for somebody more recent, you can get assessor's records that tell, usually back to about the 1930s, about the building you're looking at, what it was worth, who owned it, and also there should be a photograph with it. So that was taken probably back in the 30s. So if you're looking for house information of your own house, if it's that old, you very possibly can find a picture of it at that time frame. And this is just an example of a plat map. And this is the Bush property and part of the way that they laid it out. And so if you're interested in that, you can find plat books at the archives. And then all of the Bushes were American citizens. But if you happen to have somebody that was born somewhere else, you can find their naturalization papers oftentimes at the archives. They are also on the digital archives, which I'll talk about in a minute. The library has these kinds of things you should check for any family information. The polk directories, manuscripts, journals, books, newspaper articles that go back to the 1850s. And they're both on microfilm, and they're available online through the state library. And there's other things that they do for you, genealogical lookups, and so on. For example, this is from a newspaper article that in 1855, because George Bush was black, and he was granted his land by the federal government, he was always afraid that something would happen and the land would revert back. So he right away made sure that if anything happened to him, that his land would go to his wife. And this ran for 5 weeks in the newspaper. And then as you get off the elevator in the state library on the 2nd floor, just to your left, you'll find this set of card catalog. And there are manuscript collections in that. Oftentimes obituaries, you just look up the person's name and you'd be surprised what it'll tell you, what book to go look at, and so on and so forth. This is another example of what you can get at the state library. These are out-of-print books, and some of which are very valuable, and you just can't see them anywhere. But you can go there, and anything to do with Washington State will be probably represented. Another place to look, which is relatively new, if you go to Google and you go to books, there's a lot of out-of-print history books there that you can search. And you can do that right from home. Okay, this is an example of Snowden, who was an author who wrote about this area many, many years ago, and is out of print. But you can see there's information about George Bush. And then later on, when pulp directories were in fashion, you could look up the families. Now, the earliest one I think the library has is 1888, I believe. And you can go from there right on up to the present day, looking for addresses of people or who lived in the same house and so on. Then we have the State Digital Archives, and this is one of the things I'm most proud of working with. All of the records on the right can be looked up. In fact, let me tell you, as of today, there are 34,848,770 records that you can look up. And this month alone, there was 3,139,353 postings. All you have to do is put in the name of the person on the website that they have, and it'll search all of those records and give you everything that they have at one time. There are cemetery records, and Thurston County is represented, and all of Washington. There are probably hundreds of cemeteries listed. And again, you just put the name, the last name in, and you're going to get every one of them that they have a record of somebody being buried. I shouldn't bring this up, but you should check the law records too. And there's a document called Frontier Justice, which actually is also searched when you do the search with the digital archives. And we have a little altercation here. Nothing serious. This is a man who was arrested, and he was not, he didn't have a license. That was the problem. And then here's an account that you would see. You get both a transcribed copy, and then in most cases, you can go to see the original document. If you're lucky enough to have somebody that was put in Seattle prison, territorial prison, or Walla Walla, look what you can get. All of that information is there. Now I used, obviously none of the Bushes were ever in prison, so I used a different fellow who was charged with selling liquor illegally. And let's have a look at him, because his picture, whoops, his picture would be online as well. Isn't he a handsome galoot? Then, in 1847, this was Lewis County, Oregon, and you can look up all the censuses, territorial censuses, and find a lot of information. This is an early one. Not until 1850 did it list everybody in the family. All it did was list the ages and sexes of the other people in the family. But a little bit further along, there's a lot more information. But this is the earliest one we have, 1847. This is the last picture taken of the Bush house. I went to test the camera out, and I thought, well, it'd be a good place to go. Next morning, it was flat on the ground. An ex-mayor decided it was a hazard and there were vagrants, so we just pulled it down. Okay, I want to tell you that over here, the yellow sheets have some of the information I've given you and some that I hadn't. My website is at the bottom, and I want to say when I talk about a website, It does say .com, but anything I ever do is free. This ends up that way. But if you look on my website, which is waresearcher.com, you will have all kinds of links. And you just need to click on those and you'll go right to the places that I mentioned. And then there's a lot of history transcriptions of books that are out of print, mostly about Thurston County, but Western Washington. So please, I've written on the bottom of the sheet the website, so take a look at that. I think you'll enjoy. Thank you very much. Shanna?
Well, the story of the Bush family of Tumwater is often told and retold, but seldom are the women of the family included in the narrative. The archaeological research at the Bush property that you will hear more about here shortly has revealed many items that are related to women's work and lifeways, and archaeology along with archival and pictorial records help us see a fuller picture of the family. According to family records, George Bush was born in the late 1780s or early 1790s in Philadelphia to Matthew Bush, a person of color, either African American or East Indian, and an unnamed Caucasian woman. Several accounts characterize the family as being Quakers. No pictures of him or photographs are extant. He's shown here in an artist's view, and to the right is the tombstone of George and Isabella Bush. Throughout his life, George Bush was generally identified as being black or mulatto in census and other legal records. Most accounts describe George's life as a wandering one, and we've recently been able to document his service in the War of 1812, and that was for the work of the Daughters of the War of 1812. And these documents identify him, a little bit hard to see here, as a waiter in service to officers from Knoxville, Tennessee. And we're still working on perhaps getting some more documents about his service there. By some family accounts, he traveled to the Northwest in the 1820s as either an employee of the Hudson's Bay Company or Robideau Fur Company. By 1830, he was in Missouri, where he married Isabella, or Ibby James. She's described as being of German-American descent, and she was likely about 26 years old when they married. In some accounts, she's described as a nurse, but I haven't been able to find any substantiation of that claim. Isabella and George Bush had 5 sons while they lived in Missouri. Well, likely facing increased prejudice in the slave state of Missouri, the family joined the westward migration to the Oregon country in 1844 with some of their friends and neighbors. This image is from the George Washington Bush series by noted artist Jacob Lawrence, and is owned by the Washington State Historical Society. And Dale has asked me to say, notice the oxen on this. Several months later, when they reached the Dalles on the lower Columbia, they learned that the Oregon Provisional Government had passed a black exclusion law, which included penalties of, quote, whip lashings if blacks or mulattoes did not leave the territory. The party then did not go to the Rogue River Valley as originally intended. The family wintered near Fort Vancouver on the north side of the Columbia River in what is now Washington State, although by John Minto's account, George Bush stayed at the Dalles to mind the livestock that had come west with them. The exclusion law, coupled with the desire of settlers to secure an American foothold north of the Columbia, persuaded Bush and his party to move to Puget Sound, since the enforcement of this exclusion law was limited to American settlements south of the Columbia. The entire party headed north to the Tumwater area in the fall of 1845, arriving there in late fall. Accounts state that they first built a log house at what is now known as Bush Prairie. Isabella gave birth to Louis Nisqually Bush, a 6th son, in 1847. George Bush likely was an investor with other members in grain and lumber mills using the power of the falls of the Deschutes River, and one account notes that they soon built another dwelling with milled lumber. George and Isabella Bush developed a fine farm in the area over the next few years. In the 1850 census, when we're still Lewis County, Oregon, which included present-day Thurston County, George Bush is listed as black, Isabella as white, and their sons as mulatto. Well, while other early American settlers applied for land grants under the Oregon Donation Land Act of 1850, the Bushes had to have a special provision to claim their land because he was, quote, a free mulatto and not eligible for the land provisions in the act. 55 residents signed a petition to the Washington Territorial Legislature in 1854 to send a memorial to Congress to grant the Bushes their land claim. It was an act of Congress then that passed, and it described their property at that time as, quote, as being in a high state of cultivation, and they awarded their claim. This letter is from Columbia Lancaster, who I believe was a delegate to Congress from the territory at that time. You'll notice he notifies George Bush of Congress passing this act. The bill allocated 320 acres to George Bush, but the same amount to his wife. And that was really the intent of the Donation Land Claim Act. Isabella, thus, was an equal landowner of the claimed Bush property. You've seen this, Roger pointed it out. He published this notice in 1855, seeming to want to ensure that Isabella would retain her ownership and authority over all their property in the case of his death, reinforcing the congressional action. I think it's really remarkable for its forceful nature. It would have had the effect of protecting Isabella's rights, possibly fearing invalidation of their marriage, since interracial marriage was illegal in Washington from 1854 to 1868. George and Isabella eventually acquired additional land, which created a large farm of over 800 acres. Well, we don't have any images of Isabella James Bush, but we know about her from accounts, particularly by her son Lewis. He provided detailed information about her role in the prosperity of the farm through her relationships with both the Plamondons, early settlers associated with the Hudson's Bay Company, and with Dr. William Tolmie, the chief factor at nearby Fort Nisqually, which was a Hudson's Bay Company outpost. According to this account, she secured chickens from the Plamondons and turkey eggs from Tolmie. She then traded the turkeys for sheep from Tolmie from the large Puget Sound Agricultural Company flocks near Fort Nisqually. Lewis Bush noted that her flock was, quote, one of the greatest sources of profit in a few years. So she was definitely part of the economy of the family. Some of the accounts say that, quote, night or day, the Bushes kept open house to all comers. No one was turned away without being fed and sheltered, and in many cases their wagons carried substantial gifts of fruit, garden truck, and grain from Mr. Bush's abundant stores. But it's likely that those stores were preserved by Isabella and that she was the one who prepared the food for the visitors. And you can kind of see how that might happen, because here's the main road from Olympia to Cowlitz Landing, and there's the Bush house right there. So it was certainly a natural stopping off place for people, and their hospitality was renowned. Another family declared that her watermelons were the envy of other Thurston County gardeners, and one account states that she was a nurse, and besides nursing other settlers, she helped nurse Indian children when measles broke out in 1847-48. George Bush died in 1863 and Isabella in 1866. The next woman associated with the Bush family is Mandana Smith. She was born in 1826 in Missouri, married Duff Kimsey in 1847. They crossed the Oregon Trail the same year with her family, settling in Marion County, Oregon. Together they had 5 children before her husband died in 1858. Mandana likely met William Owen Bush, the oldest son of George and Isabella, on one of his trips to California and married him in 1859. And this letter that's in the Bush manuscript collection at the state library, which I kind of consider a love letter, talks a little bit about what the feelings may have been in the community. It says, "What do I care? They can talk as much as they please. They can't hurt me or you in the estimation of good people." William Owen Bush became one of Washington's most famous farmers. He was born in Missouri in 1832 and of course came west with his parents. He farmed for a time near Grand Mound in Thurston County, and after his parents' deaths in the 1860s, he and Mandana and their family moved to the Bush Prairie farm. Mandana and William Owen Bush had two more children, John, born in 1862, Belle in 1865, and several generations eventually lived on the farm where William Owen Bush had built his large home by the 1890s. In the center there are Mandana and William Owen Bush, and then to the left is Hannah Kimsey and her daughter Nellie, Belle Bush and George Gaston, and John and Christina Gaston Bush and their young children. So two brother-sister married brother-sister, so they were double cousins there. And also kind of off to the side, off to the side is another of the Bush brothers. And through Roger's great work, we've really been able to document how the property was really in the hands of William Owen Bush, and he managed the property. Well, a promoter of local agriculture, William Owen Bush was active in the Western Washington Industrial Association in the 1870s. He exhibited at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876. There he won bronze medals and certificates for the best wheat in the world. So it wasn't over in the Palouse, it was right here in Thurston County. After exhibiting at several other World's Fairs, the Bush exhibit was put on permanent display at the Smithsonian for a period of time. This document, I think, is really interesting. Bush was even in demand on the international scene, and this was an invitation, I believe, for the International Commission of 1883. In 1889, William Owen Bush represented Thurston County in the first state legislature. While serving in the House of Representatives, he introduced a measure to use funds under the Morrill Act to establish a college for the study of agricultural science, helping to create what is now Washington State University. Well, in 1892, the state of Washington, Thurston County, and the city of Olympia appropriated $2,300 so Bush could take an exhibit to the Chicago World's Fair of the Columbian Exposition. Mandana and other family members are shown with William Owen Bush, I think, in this proud photograph, and she is likely to have participated in raising, managing, and arranging the produce for the expositions. And this is some of the produce close up, along with a medal that Bush was awarded at that exposition. Mandana Bush died in 1899, and her obituary provides little background of her life, but mainly references her Oregon Trail experience and her husband's work in promoting agriculture in the state. William Owen Bush died in 1907, and his obituary lionized him as one of the oldest settlers of the territory and recounted his numerous medals for his exhibit, stating, quote, "No resident of the state or territory throughout its history has done more to advertise the state than William Owen Bush." So high praise. Christine and John Bush had a family of 4 daughters, Catherine, Belle, Mary, and Louise, who grew up on the farm. And these daughters, in later years, narrated the Bush family story and are the source of much of the information we have about the family. Also on the farm were the other sons of George and Isabella Bush, J.J. Bush and his wife Sarah. He died in 1888, and his wife is not listed in later census records, so we don't know what happened there. Sanford, the one that Roger fingered there, died in 1913. Tolbert died in 1904, and Lewis Bush, who wrote a lot about his family, died in 1923. George and Belle Bush Gaston lived on the farm for a time with their children Annie and George. Also on the farm was Hannah Kimsey, Mandana's daughter, and her child Nellie. Nellie and her husband Fred Reichel also lived on the farm. Their children included Leland, Carol, Janice, and Lola, all of whom lived on the farm for a time. And they also had a lot of guests, and this picture identifies many of the people that were visiting when the picture was taken. The home sites on the farm included the William Owen Bush house on the site of the original Bush log cabin, the George and Belle Gaston and John and Christina Bush homes. And there were several other outbuildings, including a blacksmith shop, and at least one former home was used as an entertainment hall. And this picture was helpful in Dale's work because it shows the barn there in back of the house. One of John Bush's daughters, Belle Bush Toohey, in her reminiscences recounts the hospitality of the family, including 4th of July gatherings, when she said, "On occasions like this, Bush Prairie was a sort of meeting place, the center of activity, where our friends and other people came to see one another." She describes large picnics with clam bakes and barbecues, likely organized by the women of the family. She talked of the dances held in the granary on the farm, with a big supper planned before the dance. She told of the special Sunday dinners with meat, ham, fruit, pie, and cake, all products of the Bush family farm and likely prepared and served by the women on the farm. She also recounted the wonderful smells from canning, making mincemeat, chutney, and chow chow. Because the Bush farmers grew wheat, threshing required a large crew, and Toohey recalled 25 men were needed for the work, and, quote, "This was much cooking for the women folks." Well, Belle Bush Gaston, the granddaughter of George and Isabella Bush, was an especially striking-looking woman who joined the cultural life of Olympia after growing up on the farm. Her obituary in 1921 referenced her parents' and grandparents' pioneering role in the development of the area, but it was said of her, "Mrs. Gaston, aside from her many and varied club and public activities, was a woman of great personal accomplishment." And this is a graduation picture from the family, and both Annie Gaston, who's in the second row there, and Nellie Kimsey are shown in the graduation photo, and I think it's from the Olympia High School. The daughter of Belle and George Gaston, Annie Gaston Sutcliffe, spent part of her youth on the Bush property, but she was one of the early elected women of Thurston County. She served as county auditor for 2 terms beginning in 1914, after she had served as a deputy auditor for several years. And this is a newspaper account about her. Interestingly, as time went on, the race of the Bush family became less and less important. By 1910, in fact, even Lewis and Sanford, the sons of George and Isabella Bush, who had been listed as mulattoes in earlier censuses, were listed as white, along with the rest of the Bush descendants. Christina Gaston Bush lived on the farm until her death in 1920. Her husband, John, lived on the farm until 1947. Their 4 daughters inherited the property, and 3 of the descendants sold their shares to Molly and her husband, Leroy West. The Wests lived on the property until their deaths, and it was sold by an heir in 1985 to another distant Bush relative, who lived on the property until 1904, when it passed out of the Bush family until 2004, when it passed out of the Bush family ownership, and at that time it was reduced to about 5 acres, and then resold in 2009 to the current owners. The house that's on the property now was built in the early 1970s, and as Roger mentioned, the William Owen Bush was demolished. Bush House was demolished in the 1970s. In 1973, however, the Soroptimists of Olympia with the state commissioned noted African-American artist Jacob Lawrence to complete the George Bush series. And these interpretive paintings about the Bush family and their experience are notable works of art. As the history keepers of the family, the Bush women family members preserved much of the family legacy through reminiscences. Recent donation of Bush materials to the Washington State Historical Society, including important papers and artifacts, come from the descendants of Nellie Kimsey Reichel, shown here. The full history, including all people who were part of a site's past, especially women, sometimes required both interpreting extant sources to place women in the narrative, especially when domestic work such as cooking, gardening, homemaking, and preserving are part of the story, and also to give full credit, as George Bush did in 1855, to the women who were partners and owners of the property.
Well, thank you, Roger and Shanna. I think what we'll see with the archaeology is that what we can do together with the historians, what we can bring together to tell you something about these individuals, something about their means, and so I'm going to look at three things. One, you know, some of the artifacts that might tell us about Mandela and Belle and the Bush family. Our main thing as an archaeologist in doing this project is to do a cultural resource survey, which has been turned into the state office, to see the integrity. How much is left there on the homestead of the Bush property in terms of archaeological sites? And we found two for sure. And also this reflects something about their means. They're certainly generous, but they also, you know, the artifacts we were finding tell us they're pretty good means for the 1840s and 50s and beyond. Again, this map has been shown. That's where the Bush house is located in this 1853 map. So we have some pretty good information as to where to look when we're doing this survey. Artifacts, most of these were collected by the property owners. We don't take any of these 100 and some artifacts that we recorded, but we're definitely interested in what's been found previously. This little picture, since the Bush, you know, Isabella and George only had boys, this probably is a dollhouse accessory or picture that might have belonged to Belle as she was growing up. And you could see their grandfather giving this to her. And nothing brings things to life more than children's toys in terms of understanding something about these people. I did bring it. It's just a very small picture. It had to have been made in England. It's pretty expensive. Most of these are found in the East. And so it very well could have been her toy. So you see something about the lives, too, from childhood on, of these individuals. This was found in where we think the original, well, the Owen house was located down in this part of the area. The original cabin was placed there by George and Isabella, and then they built the Owen house on top of that. From the survey, this is where the George and Isabella Bush house was built off of the property, Mark and Kathleen Clark's property, and quite a bit of each dot here is where we've mapped in an artifact. So all these dots are artifacts that were left in place, but this looks like the barn area here from the kinds of equipment we found. Thurston County Historic Commission, Roger and I are on that, and so is Sharon. Sharon was out there. Where are you, Sharon? I know you're here. There, Sharon. Did a survey, and we're basically going through the field. This is where Owen's house was, and putting a red flag wherever we found ceramics, glass, metal, and this was mapped in great accuracy by our SPSCC survey program. The property line here, the second Bush house is off the Clark's property. You can see the pretty well-known butternut tree here. We call it an eco-fact. That means it's an ecological artifact, and it's definitely brought here from the East and planted by George Bush and maybe Isabel Bush right there. And we found some of their orchard too over in this area. The butternut tree is 165 years old. It's definitely the result of human activity, so it's an artifact to us, and it's a very important one to our state. You know, our state started here. You can legitimately say that Washington State as a state started with the Bush family and the people they brought out at the time. So, very important tree, located next to the Clark's house. Took a little bit of damage this winter in the ice storms. 3 of the big branches fell off. One of them fell onto their roof and went into their living room a little bit. Just horrifying for them. But they are not going to do anything but prune the tree so it's a little more balanced. This tree was actually pruned by the airport. You can see some of the big branches were taken off because this is on the flightway. They weren't pruned very well. But Mark and Kathleen Clark, the owners, are very excited about preserving this tree. They recently took this seedling, which genetically proves to be a descendant of this probably oldest tree in the maybe world, the butternut tree in the world. They carefully took this seedling and had Ray Gleason remove this offshoot and transport it to the Capitol grounds. Here it is actually off the ground. They carefully picked it up and cleaned the roots, transported it with a state truck, and planted it here on the state Capitol grounds. They tried it earlier, a few years earlier, and that tree didn't survive. This tree is looking a lot better. This is it Saturday. I went out to take pictures of it, and you can see the buds coming out already from the second year of growth, and a rainbow here too on Saturday. Their homestead was right in the traditional territory of the Squaxin Island tribe, off Butt Inlet up the Deschutes River. They stayed off the river probably because they knew better. As guests of the Squaxin Island tribe, the river was exclusively owned by some of the families, but they got up here by Bush Prairie, the Olympia Airport. They're also closely associated. They knew a lot of people from the Nisqually area. They were here by invitation, and it's interesting to read the histories. The whole family learned the Deschutes language, the indigenous language here, so they could better work with their hosts, the Squaxin Island tribe. The Squaxins and Nisquallies often came to their property and stayed. You noticed how generous everybody said they were. Well, they're very generous in sharing what they were doing and back and forth with the tribes. And again, as Shanna said, their last son was named Louis Nisqually Bush. So here's the homestead. You've seen this map, but here's the Deschutes here. They stayed off the Deschutes. They were in this area, even though they were doing very well with award-winning crops. You can see this 1853 survey says the prairie soils are poor and rated sandy, but they still got award-winning, national award-winning wheat off of this property. This Aschel Curtis, Edward Curtis's brother, photograph in 1910 shows you the entrance that's there today to the Clark's house, and this is off their property. That's where the second Bush, Isabella and George Bush house was built. And you've seen this before too, is the house that Owen Bush put right on top of the original log cabin. So we're pretty hopeful that we would find both things, and we did find lots from his house, but we would find things from the original log cabin that would be the start of the state, really. Our map crew carefully mapped in where the second Bush house is off the Clark's property. This is their house and their outbuilding, but this is where we, in their garden, found an awful lot of the materials that look like they're from a barn, maybe blacksmith shop. And this is where the Owen house would be, and a lot of domestic artifacts were found. And each dot, again, is a specific artifact. So what we do is try to see the integrity. What's left here? You know, it's not standing, but so we used our survey class and their equipment to better see what we have here, so we could report this to the State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. Flagged all the artifacts that would be more in the barn area, it looks like. They gardened here, so you can see a lot more of the artifacts. And then down in this area, we were able to see where the domestic house was, and possibly the original cabin would be part of that, Owen's second house. Again, if you look at this, here's the Clark's house, their outbuilding. This is where the second George and Isabel Bush house is, and this is the entrance. So this 1910 Aschel Curtis probably shows that house. And then over here would be Owen's house and where the original cabin was, and there was some barn, maybe blacksmith shop over here. You got the butternut tree in there too, and some of the orchard, apple orchard up here. When we looked at those two areas, we could see a big difference in kinds of artifacts, and that's how we start to determine where one might be a household and one might be a barn. So anyway, you can see over here where the house was, a lot of glass and a lot of ceramics, but in the barn area here you see a lot of metal and brick, probably from the blacksmith shop. And you also see a fair amount of bone over here, and shell, which is probably from meals at the household. In the barn area, lots of bricks. That again could very well be from the blacksmith shop. We know they had a blacksmith shop over on part of the farm. Probably made their own oxen shoes. I'll go through some of the artifacts. We certainly find some blue on white ware and some pretty nice ceramics from the domestic area. They were certainly had nice plateware. This one looked like maybe a national symbol or maybe presidential symbol. We found out through research this wasn't a presidential logo, even though they were back east winning lots of awards with the Smithsonian. This is probably something they got back east potentially, but it's not a presidential seal. This is another indication of means. They had a real nice parlor stove, and again, Mandana and Belle might have kept their guests warm. This piece we found and we marked in the field, and a bit later the Clarks called us after they saw our show. We found another one. We found another one of these in the garden. Brought it to me, but it's the very same one. It's over here, but the only parlor stove that has that kind of leg is pretty elaborate parlor stove about that time period. So again, something that shows that they certainly had means in terms of what they own. This pipe was found and brought to us. It's right here, and that very well could be George's pipe. It could be Owen's pipe, or one of the men, probably, or because it could be Mandela's. But it's made of meerschaum mineral, and the only place you can get good quality meerschaum is from Turkey, and it's handmade pipe. So again, these folks got materials of real means, and so we can pretty well tell that we have the barn in very good integrity, hundreds of artifacts from both the barn and what would have been where the original cabin in Owen's house. So there's a lot of archaeological integrity. It'd be nice to test it better. We basically have been looking at things on the surface, and one of the things, geez, I had that in there, that we did find is this oxen hoof, which is actually two parts because they're cloved hoofs. This tells you something of means too. We actually, I guess I didn't keep that slide, but we also found blacksmith hammers for making probably these oxen hoofs. But if you had oxen, that's a very powerful animal, and you saw Shanna's picture of them coming out with oxen pulling those wagons. They're expensive because it's hard to maintain an oxen. You can't shoe an oxen by just lifting their legs like a horse. They won't let you do that. You have to have a hoist and take that oxen right off the ground, and then you can do whatever you want to the oxen. It freezes, and then you can put on these shoes. But it's a much more powerful. We find horseshoes there too, and a number of things like that. So these were people of means. As the Clarks said, the current owners are very user-friendly and really want us to do some more work out there. This farm is this 165-year-old tree. Bush brought it here, possibly from their DNA work, because he's he's the director of the Conservation Service here at State Conservation Service. It's had DNA testing. It shows it might be the oldest living butternut tree in the world. Pure strain. Most butternut trees are hybrids. And since it was in this flight path of Olympia, they took off these branches here. But they did move this tree to the Capitol grounds. But the Clarks are initiating parties out there. We went to the first ones. And it's going to be on 4th of July. They want you to come there too. And that's just like George and Isabella Bush. They had the biggest 4th of July party in the area every year. Just to point out something that Roger and I have been working on a bit in our commission, you saw the headstone for Isabella and George, and that's actually Mandana's headstone. And you saw in Shanna's picture, nice forest behind the headstones. We have a different scenario today, and Roger and I were trying to see if there's some way we could get this a little bit, a little more respect in terms of privacy here at the tombstone. You see back then when we made the Olympian, that there was a fair amount of vandalism. Well, I went out there Saturday, and it's pretty clean now. They cleaned it up. It looks real nice, except you still have a different kind of view behind this Pioneer Cemetery, which has really got a lot of our main pioneers, including the person that basically started our state, George and Isabel. So we're working a bit with Tumwater. I think David's here, right? And did he leave? Probably left because he knew this was coming. David here? No.
His telephone ring.
But so we hope somehow either a chain link with some kind of protection. It really has been cleaned up. From the Walmart side, it looks nice, but from the cemetery side, it's different than it used to be. So anyway, don't mean to end on a sour note, but I just wanted to point out that that's another part of our discussion here with George and Isabel, is where they've been laid to rest in Mandana too. But thank you very much. And,